Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology, hopefully help you figure out a little bit more, about why you do what you do. And today we're going to be talking about stability of personality traits. We all have personality traits. Some of them you probably inherited, some of them you developed, through one reason or another, and some of them you chose. So, all of us have them. Although some research has found late life changes in certain of the big 5 personality dimensions, such as increases in agreeableness and decreases in extraversion, because most people do become more agreeable and less extroverted. They like to be home a little more. Work has made an impressive case for the essential stability of personality traits. Hostile people are unlikely to mellow much with age unless they get psychotherapeutic treatment, and optimistic people are likely to remain their hopeful selves. So, if you find yourself being hostile and would like to change and don't know how, you could go talk to a psychotherapist. They can teach you things. They teach you tools and, skills that you might not have, that you didn't get growing up. And so your interpersonal relationships suffer. And if you grew up happy, there was this one girl, just had the best parents in the world. They always came to everything she did. They always, for her birthday party, they brought cakes and things. And I was just so jealous of her life because her parents were so supportive of her, sent her to the college she wanted to go to, the school she wanted, high school she wanted to go to, and I didn't have that, so I was just so jealous of her, but, she was just a super happy person, and of course, why not? So, not all of us come up with a situation that makes us a super happy person. So, if you hit late adulthood and you find that's a problem in your life, you're not happy, you're a hostile person, you have problems with interpersonal relationships, it's probably time to go talk to somebody, because you can get that figured out and use, develop skills and tools to use in interpersonal relationships so that you can have, healthy, fulfilling relationships. Certain persistent trait patterns contribute to adaptation to aging and may even predict health and longevity. So, if you're a very negative person, you're probably not going to live as long as someone who's a very positive person. So, it behooves you to kind of take your baggage out. Contrary to the common belief that older adults tend to be depressed, they actually tend to grow more content and satisfied with life. Because, number one, the pressure's off. They don't have to work anymore. They got the kids grown. Some people have to raise their grandkids, but not everyone does. And, they're usually out doing what they want to do, or being at home doing what they want to do. So, usually, they are more content with their life, because they're making it what they want it to be. In a longitudinal study that followed 4 generations for 23 years, self-reported negative emotions such as restlessness, boredom, loneliness, unhappiness, and depression decreased with age. So that's some good news. As you get older, those more negative emotions might decrease. And like I was talking about the other day, when your hormone levels decrease, some of that decreases as well. Because as we know, testosterone, is the aggressive hormone. And unfortunately, women can kind of go the other way. We all know women who in their 50s were having hot flashes and were being really, not nice. That's the nice word for it. But hormonal changes can make it better, for your outlook. It can decrease the negative, triggers. though the rate of decrease slowed after age 60. So when you hit 60, you're kind of leveled out, you're kind of mellowed out. At the same time, positive emotionality, excitement, interest, pride, and a sense of accomplishment tended to remain stable until late life and then declined only slightly and gradually. So if you're a positive person and you're happy with your life, you're going to be, carrying that into your old age, and it's going to be carrying longer than people who have negative emotions. And you're probably going to live longer and be happier because you're going to be healthier. You're not going to be putting that stress on your heart and brain with all that negative stuff. A possible explanation for this generally positive picture comes from socio-emotional selectivity theory. Say that 3 times fast. As people get older, they tend to seek out activities and people that give them emotional gratification. And like I say, that's something that you should be doing. Seeking out things that make you happy. And, I've noticed as I've gotten older, I had a friend, I call her a friend, when I was in elementary school that I had up into my, 30s. And at one point, I realized this woman is a she has been mean to me, saying snippy little mean things to me when we were in elementary school and middle school and high school. She wanted to steal my boyfriend at the time in high school, and later on she wanted to steal my husband, So it's like, why was I even friends with this person? Out of here. Not doing that anymore. As we get older, we become more selective with who we let into our life. Because if someone is, not treating you very well, and they're being mean to you, and you finally come to the point where like, I don't want this drama anymore. I don't want to deal with this. I'm trying to have a life. I'm a happy person. I'm living my happy little life over here. I don't need this in my lap anymore. Get it out of here. And you're well within your right to say that. In addition, older adults' ability to regulate their emotions may help explain why they tend to be happier and more cheerful than younger adults. So, older adults can regulate their emotions better. We learn, we grow. Like I said, until the last day you're here, you're learning and growing and developing as a person. Whereas younger folks might be more emotional, more full of hormones, and they're making those impulsive decisions, older folks can stop and think, take a step back, say, now what's really going on here? And, it might be something that they want to deal with or not want to deal with. And to experience negative emotions less often and more fleetingly. So older folks, we experience them less often, and they come and go, However, 2 of the big 5 personality traits tend to modify the pattern just described. People with extroverted personalities, or outgoing and socially oriented, tend to report especially high levels of positive emotion initially, and are more likely than others to retain their positivity throughout life. So, that's good news for the positive folks. If your glass is half full, it's going to stay half full forever. Good to know. But yeah, again, if you're living in a positive vibe, you're going to live longer, you're going to be happier than the negative guys. And that's just a fact. People with neurotic personalities, or moody, touchy, anxious, and restless, and those are people I have problems dealing with, are more likely to report negative and not positive emotions, because that's their outlook on life. If you're a neurotic person and you're moody, of course you're not enjoying life because you're being moody. If you're touchy, if every time somebody says something to you, you're, and it's like, dude, calm down. people aren't going to want to deal with that. But, you're going to be unhappy if every little thing sets you off. Anxious folks. I don't like people with anxiety. And I know that's terrible to say. But, because I'm not that way, when they're doing that, I'm taking a step and it's like, dear goodness sakes, why are you having such a meltdown about this, And I know they can't really help it, but in the moment, you're just kind of like, things that make you go, and I know people, I was on anxiety meds for 6 months after my mother passed away because, she had me to quit my job and, everything, and, then we were like best friends for like the last 5 years of her life. We did everything together. And then suddenly I had this, best friend, and I was helping her and things, and then suddenly she was just gone one day. I got the call that, she had just dropped and was gone. So, yeah, I was depressed and anxious, and I was on meds for 6 months. But after that, I realized I didn't really need the meds anymore. I was doing all right. So, I asked my doctor and got off of them, and then I was fine. So, I know anxiety is no joke. It's very serious. I joke about it because I had it. I took drugs. I can joke about it. But, a lot of people have such problems with anxiety that you can't really help them. I had a woman that I was coaching, and her anxiety was so bad that I couldn't help her because she would get hung up on one word, or one phrase. And it's like, you missed the whole thing I said getting hung up on this one phrase, and she was supposedly on meds, but she didn't take her meds, so she really wasn't on meds. But her anxiety was so high, I could not get a lesson through her brain because she got so hung up on like one word. Well, what does that mean? What does that? You say that. What does that mean? Are you saying this? And it's like, no, I'm not. But that's a thing with anxiety. If someone has anxiety so bad that you can't teach them something because they're getting hung up on like one word or one phrase, then that's a problem for them. So I recommend, if you are having anxiety, get the anxiety meds because they do help. And it might be a situational thing. You might not have to take them forever. But that also might be that you've inherited that, and you might have to take them forever. It's a tiny little pill. It's not going to, impact your life that much. But when you do take it, it is going to impact your life. Because it's going to make your life better, and it's going to make you less anxious. And then you can do more with your life when you're not all worried about what's, people thinking of you, what's they doing, and, what's going to happen. Anxiety is a killer, and it's bad, and it behooves you to stop it. And restless people. I mean, we've all heard the stories of men and women who just like suddenly left their family and took off, went somewhere, because they were restless. And restlessness really is unhappiness. You're unhappy with your life, you're unhappy with your situation. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. Now, sometimes they don't tell the family or the spouse or whatever that they're not happy. They just make the decision one day, I'm so unhappy, I'm leaving, I'm not doing this anymore. Then it just looks like they just up and left. But they were probably thinking about this for quite a while before they actually did it. And anyway, these people are more likely to report negative and not positive emotions and tend to become even less positive. So, if you're like this, you're going to be even less positive as you get older. And that's a dang shame for you and everybody around you. And no less negative. So they're going to become less negative, like the other, people that fall in the average column. They're going to stay leaning towards the negative. Over time. Neuroticism is a far more powerful predictor of moods and mood disorders than age, race, gender, income, education, and marital status. So, if you suffer from one of those neurotic traits, I'll go over these again: moodiness, touchiness, anxiety, and restlessness. It's going to behoove you to go talk to somebody. Go get psychotherapy, go to a psychiatrist, do med management. Take care of this problem, because it's not going to get better with age, as you just heard. And again, you want to go into old age. Most of us want to age gracefully, be good grandparents, and have a settled, nice retirement. And if you fall into one of these categories, you're probably not gonna. And I know there's people who could be watching right now who are not liking this, and you can turn me off. That's fine. I don't care. But it's only for your own good, like I said, and your families and the people who know you. Because if you're just this miserable curmudgeon all the time, people are not going to want to deal with that. They're not going to want to, especially positive people, they're not going to want to deal with that. Because it's like, I'm in my lane, trying to have my happy little life, and now you're over here being all like, so, I don't want to deal with it. But, if you find yourself with that type of mindset, go get some help, so that, your later life years can be your better life years. Does personality become more rigid in old age? Early cross-sectional research seemed to support that view. However, McRae and Costa, in large longitudinal studies, used a variety of samples and measures, have shown that this is not true for most people. So, you can change. You don't have to be a negative Nelly. You can change. So, that's hopeful there for you folks. If you find yourself on the negative Nelly or negative Ned side, you can change. Likewise, personality tests of 3,442 participants in the Seattle longitudinal study found only modest longitudinal declines in flexibility between ages 60 and 81, but much larger cohort differences. So, again, you're going to maybe decline a little bit in your ability to adapt to situations as you get older. But, again, the more positive you are, the better it's going to be for you. As a group, people in more recent cohorts seem to be more flexible, that is, less rigid than previous cohorts. Now, I've noticed that about generations. My children's generation is much more thoughtful than my generation was. I mean, I've watched these kids do like really nice things for their friends or family or whatever. And it's just something they think of. And I think about when I was, young, we weren't like that. We weren't like that as a generation. My friends weren't like that. People I knew weren't like that. Things they think of were something that I would have never even thought of. It wasn't that I wasn't, thoughtful or whatever. I just would have never thought of that. I would never thought of offering to do this or that, or giving him this or that. Never would have thought about it. So, I think the generations are, learning more about how to be, thoughtful of other people. They teach, this, they have group at school. They have, counselors. They teach these things on how to be more, well, they used to. Now, with this current administration, that's all going away, I guess. But they used to teach other how to be decent people to each other. And I think that's something that's very good, because that's something we need. Society is growing. It's not growing as much as it used to be. But we all have to live together on this earth. So it makes sense for people to get along, and, I think our kids got better at that. My children, Gen Y, or, the millennials, got better at that than our generation and my parents' generation were. So, if you're an older person and you got a lot of negative outlooks, maybe run something by your kid. Say, what do you think about this? Because I do that sometimes. But, a lot of times they have more modern thoughts on things than we do. We get stuck in our ways, and sometimes what is a lot to us is something that they can just walk through easy. So these findings suggest that increases in rigidity found in early cross-sectional studies may actually have been tied not to age, but to the culturally influenced baggage of life experience that a particular generation carries throughout adulthood. And remember, we talked about this a while back, that the time you're born in affects your whole outlook as a person. My excuse me, my parents were born in the time that World War II was going on. The fathers were off at war. The mothers were doing their best to raise the kids. So I think they kind of grew up with an unsurety, an insecure, attachment problem, where, they weren't sure, if dad was coming back, if dad was going to be around. And that bred kind of an insecure, thing for them. My grandparents were around for World War One. They saw their, brothers and, maybe their fathers going into that. So, I'm sure that affected them. My generation had the Vietnam War here, in America. A lot of my school, friends had dads in Vietnam. My dad was older, so he didn't go to Vietnam. But, a lot of them had that same thing going on. It's like, I wasn't sure if my dad was coming back. And, mom was all stressed out and mean, because she had to raise us herself. And, we had a situation like that in my family, where the parents got divorced. And I think the mom was pretty unhappy and resented that. And so sometimes she took it out on the kids. But my kids' generation, I think, had to deal with less. Now, my youngest son, he saw the towers burning that day on 9/11, and he was just really in shock. He's like, is that real? Is that real? And I was like, sorry, honey, yes, that's real. That's sad that some bad person would do that. So, he has kind of a watchful attitude about what's going on. So, every generation comes up in a time where there's something going on in the culture that affects the culture as a whole. And that also affects you as an individual. So, different generations have different traits based on the time that they were living through. So, again, what's right for one generation is not necessarily right for all generations. And that's why we grow and evolve. Because, this way of doing things might have been right for these folks, but it's not right for these other folks. So, if flexibility is becoming more characteristic of today's young adults, and that's something that they've, had to learn, flexibility, that, no longer is like we were talking about this a while back with the kids. No longer are the days where you get a job, you work for 25 years, you get your gold watch and your pension, and you're set for the rest of your life. Those days are gone. That's not a thing anymore. The way it works now is, you work, you put into a 401k or 403b, whichever you got, and hope you can save up enough money that you got a little something so you can either buy a car or a house or whatever when you retire. You hope that Social Security is still going to exist. The way the current administration is playing games, it might not. But you paid into it all your life, so hopefully you can still get that when you come of age. And that's something that we're dealing with right now. My husband's trying to decide he got old enough to collect his 401k, and he got him a truck. He'd been working on getting a truck for 30 years. But, he's trying to decide when he's going to retire because he's got some physical problems. And he liked to retire, but then he's like, I won't get enough money. I want to wait till I'm older, so I can get my full, Social Security coming in. So that's something that he's, having to play with the decision of now. But, that's what we told our kids, invest, open up. 2 of my children have a Roth IRA. So, they're ahead of the game. But like I said, those days are gone. You're going to have to take care of yourself. And of course, our investment account looks like today, because of the lovely decisions our man in charge are making, because, he's doing dumb stuff that's affecting everybody and kind of, cutting his nose off to spite his face. I'll be happy if we just have a country 3 years from now, and trying to tell people what they can and can't do with their country, and saying, we want control of this and that in some other country, and we want to take your country and annex your... What the bleep? Have you lost your freaking mind? You megalomaniac. Get over yourself. But, I'm hoping that when my children are grown, that extra bit of, advice will help them out, and they'll have a little something when they have to retire to fall back on. If flexibility is becoming more characteristic of today's young adults, and if they carry the flexibility into later life, then future generations of older adults may be able to adapt more readily than their predecessors to the challenges of aging. And that's good. That's what we want. We want our kids to have a better time of it than we do. And that's why I don't understand these stars and famous people, rich people. I'm not leaving my kids anything. Wow. You realize that's how the older generations built wealth. They left it to their kids, who had an easier time than them. And then they left that to their kids, and that's how they built wealth. That's how they had the manners, That's how we got the Rockefellers and folks, Carnegies that had money, because it was passed down in the family, and that's how a family builds wealth. So for these famous people and other people to say, I'm not giving my kids anything, that's basically like you're taking away your family's wealth for the rest of their life. You could give that to your family, and that's how they build wealth. And this generation builds on what you did, the next generation builds on what they did, and on and on. And that's how families build wealth. So these folks that are doing this, you're stealing from, your children or grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or whatever. And if you're just that selfish, that you don't want to do that, then you're not a great person. Or if you think you're teaching them to go get their own, that is only about half true. The other thing that you're teaching them is you don't value them enough to leave them your hard-earned money. So that's a catch-22. I think that we need to, especially here in America, people have forgotten a lot of the ways that it was done in Europe. That these big civilizations, England, France, Germany, Rome, and Italy, were built. And how wealth was built in families. Families became wealthy families because they shared the wealth with the children and grandchildren, whatever. Now, are there always going to be loafers who just live off the money? Yes, there's always going to be, because that's what they choose to do. But, again, there's going to be kids who take that money and do something good with it, who pay it forward. So, that's my opinion on, people who don't provide for the future generations of their family, that you're ripping your great-grandkids off, and that's not cool. So, that's the talk on the stability of personality traits. Some of them stay, some of them go. If you're a more negative person, that's going to carry longer. Maybe go get some help with that, because your retirement life is supposed to be the happiest years of your life. After the young years, probably your high school or college or wherever, before you got responsibility. So, you might want to make it your best years by kind of taking out the garbage, and making it happier. And if you're a positive person, you're probably going to have a happy life anyway, because you already are. So, that's where I'm going to leave you for today. Hope this helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program, so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching. That's all for now. Until next time.